Natlan has been a mixed bag for sure. Everything from the story to some of the other things going on, the character designs, and how they look a little bit too modern for Genshin Impact, and some say they don't even look like Genshin characters at all. There's a varying array of opinions about 5.x and Natlan, but there's one topic in particular I feel may be paramount to the others, and that topic is the Natlan exclusive mechanics. Now, there's a whole suite of these mechanics I'm talking about. The Nightsoul mechanics, the Phlogiston, heavily nerfed abilities outside of Natlan's borders, exclusive artifacts, and heavy emphasis on Natlan characters synergizing with one another, to the point that Mavuika feels like the most inhibited Archon to date. These individual components of this Natlan suite of gimmicks are concerning enough on their own, but it's when you look at them as a bigger picture that I feel it's the paramount discussion that needs to be had. Because sure, the story may have been hit or miss, and the character designs and how they look may not be everyone's cup of tea, but these Natlan mechanics, they represent something existential to the game. And no, I'm not trying to be dramatic, I'm being serious here. I believe it can threaten the entire ecosystem of the game. I know I reference old videos quite often, but to be fair, that does kind of make sense since this is an ongoing game. Opinions on past states and ideas in the game, when juxtaposed to current ones, can help us to reverse engineer the current situation and understand exactly why we do or don't like the way things are going or where they're heading. It's one thing to know whether or not you like something or don't, but it's another to be able to pick it apart and tell why. And this is why I reference old videos quite often, because they're snapshots of an opinion locked in time, and when we look at what's going on now, we can look back to those moments and say, what's changed? What's different? Why did I like it then and I don't like it now? Or why did I not like this then, but I do like it now? Why was I not concerned about that, but suddenly I am concerned about this? That said, I believe there's an old discussion of mine that we can bring up that's relevant to the current Natlan situation. And that would be the video I did where I expressed that I was going to be missing swimming from Fontaine. What does swimming in Fontaine have in common with Nightsoul mechanics and Nightsoul Burst and Phlogiston from Natlan? The answer to that is, it's an exclusive mechanic to the region it was introduced. Whether you like swimming or hate it, it was an absolutely transformative new gameplay mechanic. But while I do miss swimming and would still like to have it, to be honest, it's not game breaking to the point that not having it makes the game feel bad. It's a cool mechanic in my opinion, and again, that might not be your opinion, but either way it goes, like it or hate it, what we can all agree on is that after 4.x Fontaine, swimming's exclusion from the game, past and future, has had no effect on the game, past or future. We don't think about swimming when we're here in Natlan. So then why do I feel a little uneasy about the Natlan mechanics? We don't have Fontaine mechanics anymore and the game is just fine, right? Well, yes, that's true. But there are fundamental differences in the way that Natlan is handling its regional mechanics compared to Fontaine, and that's why I'm even bringing up Fontaine in the first place, because I want to use it to outline the correct way to handle these regional mechanics to avoid what I feel to be a looming existential problem. And the difference is, swimming was tied to the region, whereas Natlan's mechanics was tied to both the region and the characters. As I said, we don't even think about swimming outside of Fontaine. But that's because swimming is irrelevant to anything we do outside of Fontaine. That's completely different though than Phlogiston and Nightsoul mechanics from Natlan. The Natlan cast runs on Phlogiston and Nightsoul points. Regional mechanics just like swimming, but the difference is, swimming was not tied to any one character. It's a universal mechanic. Yes, it's tied to a region, so it is region exclusive, but whether you're using the Traveler, or a Mondstadt character, or, an Inazuma character, whatever. You can swim in Fontaine. It even works retroactively. You can take your Natlan characters back to Fontaine and swim. So, it's universal. And also, it's written into the land and not characters' kits. So when we moved forward to Natlan, we didn't feel like any one character was being singled out, or that they were losing anything major. We have the luxury of not thinking about swimming while we're in Natlan, because what does it mean to us now? Well, what happens as we move away from Natlan? Can we say the same about Phlogiston and Nightsoul mechanics? Well, no, we can't, and we don't even have to wait into the future to find this out. We can leave Natlan right now in the game and go back to any old region and see how it affects the use of our Natlan characters. Their mechanics are severely limited. Kenichi can only grapple one time. Mualani has like half the surf time. It's really limiting and doesn't feel too good. And this is the concern because we're not going to be in Natlan forever. As is, it doesn't feel like that big of a deal because we don't really go back to older regions anyway, right? Like, the majority of our time is being spent in Natlan, so it's in the back of our minds. It's not something that's immediately upon us. We're just having fun using our characters as intended, and nothing feels too off as long as we're here in Natlan, which currently we are. The thing is, we're not concerned about the past though, we're looking towards the future. And what's gonna happen once we do leave Natlan and go to the next place? Will our Natlan characters just become husks of their former selves? The game right now is training our brains to view these characters as they are in Natlan as the real them. This is them. This is what we're playing every day, right? While we're here in Natlan, so it's just what we know. But we are not going to like the way that feels once we leave Natlan and these characters have half of the uptimes they used to, with significant decreases in total damage output potential, as well as decreases in overall world exploration satisfaction. It's going to be taken away from us, just like swimming was. But the difference here is, at least swimming stayed behind. It was not tied to anyone's kits, and it was a universal mechanic that no one suffered for once it was gone. Once we leave Natlan though, characters are going to suffer. And that's because in Natlan, these are not universal mechanics. These mechanics are tied to their kits. So once you move forward, you're leaving the Phlogiston behind. You're not leaving the mechanic behind necessarily. And without the Phlogiston, the mechanic suffers really bad. These mechanics being tied to the character's kits causes even more concerns, however, especially when we look at the Pyro Archon Mavuika. Her ultimate charges two ways, one with the use of allies' Nightsoul point, and two with normal attacks. However, the charge up rate with the normal attacks is so abysmal that basically it's relying on Nightsoul points. If you want to consistently use her ultimate, then more than likely you're going to be using her with a Natlan character, or characters, especially Shilonen and or Sitlali. The thing about that is, it's more or less hindering future potential teams. Question: once we leave a region, how often do we get characters from that region again in the future? Other than Liyue, it's not often. And what this essentially means is that Mavuika's best teammates, they're kind of here and that's gonna be it. Like, it's gonna be a long time before we even potentially get a new Natlan character that could work well with the Pyro Archon. That's just potentially because we don't know what a future Natlan character might be. They might not work great with the Pyro Archon at all, so that's just speaking potentially. It could be a year or years before we receive another character that works just as well with her. And that means the Natlan cast we have now, that's kind of her team. And she does have current uses with other characters outside of Natlan, that's true, but when we're talking specifically about charging her ultimate, this is the situation we run into. And for an Archon, it feels very limiting. Archons have traditionally been very universal. That isn't to say that they can always be used in any situation, but when they can be used, they fit into a million slots and have almost boundless limitations and a million synergies. Some enemies can hurt you through shields, but if they cannot hurt you through shields, then Zhongli is simply the best. There's little debate to be had, and that stayed true all the way up until now. As long as an enemy does regular damage, Zhongli can shield it, and he is still the best at doing that. He moves forward with the game. Furina as well, think about it. Sure, she might require a healer, but it doesn't really matter what healer that is as long as they do a good job at it. Shilonen came out in Natlan, but retroactively, Shilonen can be fit into Furina teams. That's just not the same for Mavuika. Her burst strongly incentivizes using other Natlan characters with her, and what that essentially means is that 1/2 or even 3/4 of her team is kind of determined from this point on, at least if you want to be optimal about it. This is way different than Furina, who works with old healers, current healers, and even future healers like Shilonen. For Mavuika though, when's the next time we're going to get a character that can help her charge her burst? And that's the existential fear I have. What is going to become of our characters now, in the future? It's one thing for a game to leave behind mechanics, just like we left swimming behind, but the nuances between the things that tied swimming to Fontaine and the things that tie the current Natlan characters to Natlan are completely different, because swimming was only tied to Fontaine, whereas the characters themselves are what seem to be tied to this region and each other. I fear for the future outlooks of these characters that we're currently getting in Natlan. We've never had to contend with this kind of thing before, because anything added to the game was always a more universal thing. Hoyoverse has gone tinkering with the formula though, and may have created a pretty messy situation. Right now it doesn't feel so bad because the game is centered around these characters and the region they come from, but that's just not gonna last forever. Imagine if Fontaine characters had to swim in Fontaine waters for a few seconds to charge up a special meter to increase the powers of their abilities. Novelette, Farina, Navia, they would all feel quite a bit worse right now in Natlan because there's no Fontaine waters for them to swim in. We don't have to think about that though, because nothing in their kits was tied to actually swimming. But that is what's possible to happen once we move out of Natlan. They're not going to feel as good, man, and Mavuika is going to be married to optimal teammates for quite a long time. But then, what could have been done to change this trajectory, or what needs to happen now in order to make sure things don't go down such a terrible path? This is where looking at the past can be useful. When thinking about why I was sad that swimming was going to be leaving the game, I came up with many reasons, but none of them had to do anything with the character's functionality. It was because swimming seemed to add another layer of world exploration to the game. In contrast, I also don't want Phlogiston to leave the game, but it's for an entirely different reason. We need Phlogiston for full character functionalities. We did not need swimming for full character functionalities. And that's the difference between an acceptable regional mechanic like swimming and what's looking like it's a pretty bad regional mechanic in hindsight with Phlogiston. A good regional mechanic is universal and isn't tied to characters' kits in such a way that without it, it feels like they're losing out on an entire constellation's worth of power. But then, what can be done? If the idea is that we don't want to leave Phlogiston behind because our characters will feel worse, then maybe the idea is that we can potentially take it into the future. But how when it's tied to Natlan? I think a good way to approach this would be food items or elixirs, but see, the problem then is the fact that how would you replenish it? Would you just have to repeatedly take the food item or elixir over and over again every time you deplete your bar? Like, that's not really intuitive. And a food item or elixir that just straight up gives you, say, 15 minutes worth of Phlogiston, that would just be too OP, because the Nightsoul state is designed to run out after a period of time, even in Natlan. It's not designed for you to have 100% unfettered access to the state. In that case, even when you're in Natlan, you would just use this food or elixir, and you wouldn't even bother with the Phlogiston, so they couldn't do it like that. But I think what could be done is some type of food or elixir that slowly replenishes your bar over the course of, say, 10 seconds or so. This way, you wouldn't repeatedly need to retake the food item or elixir in order to replenish your meter, but at the same time you wouldn't have 100% unfettered access to it either. You would have a cooldown on it, and it would replenish over a dozen seconds or so. Or maybe even half a minute, I don't know, but you get the point. And then, as far as future Nightsoul synergy goes, maybe just, I don't know, some kind of artifact or something that allows non-Natlan characters to have their own pseudo Nightsoul points or something. Of course the artifact set would have some other effects too, but this would be some kind of cool way in order to let non-Natlan characters interact with the Nightsoul mechanics of the Natlan characters, especially those like Mavuika who really want someone to use Nightsoul points. Something like that could open up a lot of characters to be usable with Mavuika. Just a generic Nightsoul meter that can be put on any character if they wear the artifact set. This would even encourage build diversity, because maybe there are some characters you would never think to use in this way, but maybe they have really good Nightsoul point usage, and maybe they're really good with Mavuika as a result. See what I mean? In any case, regional mechanics can definitely be done correctly, and Hoyo even showed that they know how to do it correctly when they did swimming. It didn't affect us when they took it away. We surely missed it, Well, at least I did, but I was able to get over it because the game in the future was not affected and our characters continued to function as they always did. Natlan's take on regional mechanics, though, is not that. It's completely different and even seeks to challenge the viability of our characters once we're gone, as well as limits the flexibility of some characters' usages. Why is this such an existential thing in my opinion? Because since the start of the game, we've always been able to take what we have forward and it's never felt worse. This is one of the few times I can think of where we're taking something forward, our characters, but they are going to feel worse. That's just not really debatable. I mean, it is an opinion, so it is debatable, but I mean, I don't think many people are going to disagree with that once we reach that point in time. It's just a little bit concerning, I'm not gonna lie. Tying character functionality so heavily to Phlogiston and being in Natlan, and tying that so heavily to the Nightsoul state and Nightsoul bursts and Nightsoul mechanics, and tying the characters so closely together, and tying the artifacts so closely to the characters' kits, it just kind of made an exclusive situation in which, while we are here, they are definitely the best there are. There's little debate on that either, but when we're not here anymore, I just don't want them to fade into obscurity. I've paid way too much for these characters to just fall off like that, man.